I was 9 years old the first time I saw Jonah Briggs walk into a room and make it quiet. Not because he yelled, not because he threw his weight around. Jonah was the kind of man quiet made room for. 90 now, scar along his jaw like a comma at the end of a long sentence. Olive bomber jacket that had seen more miles than most men cane. He used more like a metronome than a crutch. Folks in Weston Springs said he was fragile. But if you ever looked him in the eyes, you knew better. That look said, I've outlived storms with names. That morning, the sun slid in low through the blinds at Briggs Corner, the diner Jonah had bought after he came home from, well, the parts of service nobody prints on posters. Grease popped on the griddle, cups clicked. A church group whispered too loud about everything and nothing. Nia Porter Young, fierce, always tired from holding up half her family, poured Jonah his usual and tried not to let her hands shake. On the far wall, a bulletin board of community pride photos somehow missed every black council member this town ever had. Little things that add up until your shoulders carry weights nobody sees. Then the doorbells jangled like they were nervous. 3 uniforms drifted in with that swagger you learn from Getting Away with Everything. Sergeant Dan Keller, with the movie star jaw and the empty eyes, Officer Brandt, who was all bark until he wasn't, and Sutter, the quiet one who watched like a snake. They smelled trouble before they even saw Jonah, and then of course they saw him, flag patch on the jacket sleeve, scar the calm. Keller's smile showed every tooth, but never reached his eyes. Well, what do we have here? Keller drawled, tapping the frayed flag. Playing dress up. Grandpa picked that up at a yard sale? Brandt laughed too hard. Yard sale's too fancy. Dumpster'll do. Sutter didn't laugh. He drifted, angling the room, finding the blind spots the way you do when you plan something and want nobody to see. The diner went church silent. Nia put the pot down before she dropped it. Walt Garner, old mechanic Vietnam cap, pulled low. The kind of friend you earn, shifted in his seat and nodded at Jonah like, I'm here, say when. Jonah didn't flinch. He raised the cup, sipped, set it down with hands that had handled more delicate things than ceramic. He met Keller's eyes, slow, steady, like water wearing down stone. What's wrong, old man? Brandt said. Forget how to use your words. Jonah's voice came quiet enough. You had to lean in. I saved them for when they matter. Keller's grin curdled. He reached, flicked the flag patch again. Then, faster than anyone expected from a 90-year-old situation, he snatched Jonah's collar and slammed the cup off the wall. Porcelain shattered like a small bomb, coffee streaking down the wallpaper, like a Rorschach of everything wrong with that his town. Move, Keller hissed. Jonah's eyes didn't blink. Step back, son. You're making a mistake you can't take back. Sutter's voice, barely more than breath, floated in, break him. Keller didn't need another invitation. He drove a fist into Jonah's ribs, calculated, mean, made for folding a man. The whole diner winced. Jonah shifted the way a man learns to move when getting hit is part of the job. It hurt God, it hurt, but it didn't fold him. Brandt came in sloppy, and Jonah stepped inside, pressed thumb to tendon, twisted a wrist in a way they don't teach at the academy, and suddenly Keller wasn't vertical anymore. He was airborne, badge flashing under bad lights, landing in a tangle of napkins and pride. Gasps. A fork clattered. Someone whispered, Lord. Nia's hands flew to her mouth, eyes bright with fear and a little wonder she couldn't hide. Walt stood, old bones aligning into a stance he'd used in a country nobody in the diner could spell. It could have ended their lesson, taught crowd released from its spell, but pride will always double down. Brandt lunged, telegraphing anger instead of skill. Jonah slid elbow, found throat. Brandt gagged and stumbled into a sugar caddy. Sutter moved like he'd been waiting for the invitation baton, outlow kick aimed at Jonah's knee. Old doesn't mean slow when the body remembers. Jonah pivoted, cane sweeping Sutter's ankles, and the quiet one hit linoleum, hard jaw cracking against the truth of it. And yet, numbers still count. Keller recovered with more rage than sense. The baton came down, caught Jonah's forearm, sent lightning through bone. Brandt's boot found the same ribs Keller had tested. Something gave. Jonah grunted, no theatrics, just math pain, breath choices. They got him down. Handcuffs bit skin. Sutter ground a heel into Jonah's fingers. Nia screamed. Walt took a step, and Sutter's pistol butt found his temple. The sound was a wet, ugly punctuation. You done, Keller said, leaning over, the sweat and cologne heavy. Say please, and maybe we'll... My phone, Jonah said, calm, blood in his teeth, but not his voice. Jacket pocket. Brant laughed. Who you gonna call bingo club? Keller fished it out, held the beat-up flip phone like a trophy. Make your call. Legend. Knuckles white against tile cuffs tight. Jonah thumbed numbers from a memory palace built over decades. He didn't look at the keys. He looked at Keller. This is Briggs, he said, voice shifting to a cadence only a handful of people on Earth shared. Delta retired. Patch me to the Pentagon switch. Code Echo 97. Brant chuckled, one of those laughs people use when they're not sure they're safe anymore. Keller's smirk wobbled. Sutter stopped grinding his heel. The first radio cracked like thunder in an empty room. Dispatch to units Keller Brant. Sutter badge and location now. Something moved under Keller's skin. He swallowed. Another voice, colder clipped, cut through the static. All units at Briggs Corner, stand down. Surrender weapons to incoming state authority. This is a federal directive. Naya exhaled a sound halfway between prayer and a curse. Walt blinked back into the world blood on his brow and a grin curling. Keller fumbled with his mic, trying to make his voice find its base again. This is Sergeant Keller, badge negative, the Fed voice snapped. No speeches. Stand down. They took the cuffs off Jonah. Paramedics made noises about ribs and sutures. Sheriff Dole made his entrance later, with television hair and a handshake smile that didn't touch his eyes, tried to smother the fire under a blanket labeled local matter. He warned, not asked. But he didn't know the thing about embers. You can't threaten ash back into wood. At County General, I watched Jonah breathe through broken ribs like he'd done it before. Naya sat with swollen eyes and a spine that wouldn't bend. Walt cracked jokes until the nurse threatened to tape his mouth and then brought him more ice anyway. The sheriff's press conference played on the room TV. The script was tired, disorderly. Suspect inconsistencies in service record, age-related confusion. They always bring your age to your own funeral. Jonah just studied the screen with that quiet smile that isn't happy at all. Back home, his kitchen turned into a war room paper instead of bullets highlighters for tracers. Lorraine Pierce, retired county records clerk with a conscience that wouldn't stay quiet, showed up with manila folders she wasn't supposed to have. Walt brought a notebook of parts numbers and dates from police cruisers that magically repaired themselves with equipment that never existed on paper. Nia remembered who toasted what at which table on nights mandatory training supposedly filled the calendar. The first brick came through the window at dawn, glass skittering across the linoleum like frightened beetles. A note rubber banded to it, back off or die. Nia read it, voice steady in a way that made the words more dangerous. They don't know what scared feels like, she said. My mother kept working after they fired her for reporting a supervisor. We don't scare easy. Lorraine straightened her blouse. Walt picked glass out of the butter like it was Tuesday. They went after all of them, of course they did. Lorraine overdosed, according to a label, so new the pharmacy ink shone. Walt assaulted an officer across town at a time I watched him fall asleep in Jonah's chair. Nia lost her job because a sudden cascade of health code violations discovered by a man with immaculate nails made the owner see danger where there was only courage. Sheriff Dole smiled for cameras and narrowed his eyes for everyone else. Jonah looked at the triangle of folded flag in his closet, brushed a thumb over the cloth. They started the shooting war, he said, voice more tired than angry. We'll end it in the paperwork. He made calls he hadn't made in years, numbers he'd kept for reasons even he probably couldn't explain. General Carver from somewhere above my head said words like audit and task force and secure chain of custody. Jonah said Founders Day parade and everyone will be there. The line went quiet in a way that meant it was busy. Saturday showed up clean and blue. Flags everywhere, brass-polished band kids, itchy and polyester. Sheriff Dole did his politician handshake, tore Keller and Brant and Sutter in their Sunday best blues, all shine no soul. Jonah sat on a bench like a man waiting for a bus that only stops once in a lifetime. Nia slid in beside him, back from a safe house nobody in Weston Springs could find on a map. You sure about this? She asked. Jonah nodded, patted the inside of his jacket where Lorraine's memo felt like a live wire. When he finally took the mic slow, careful, every breath measured, you could feel the town lean forward. Name's Jonah Briggs, he said, like anyone needed the reminder. And I've spent most of my life defending the parts of this country we say out loud and the parts we whisper. Today I'm not talking about foreign enemies. He held up papers, bank trails, signatures, a dead auditor's last work. I'm talking about thieves in uniforms who turned training grants into lake houses and equipment into cow. Sheriff Dole climbed the steps like he owned them. That's enough, he snapped, smile gone. Get him down. Keller and Brandt started muscling through the crowd. Sutter doing the quiet dart he favored, but they couldn't seem to get traction. The parade security, who looked a little too sharp for Weston Springs, weren't moving. They were bracing. Last chance, Jonah said, turning toward the men who'd bloodied him in his own diner. Surrender. Brandt snorted and swung wide, telegraphed from his hip. Jonah stepped in, knee up, breath out, and Brandt folded like he had secrets inside him that needed protecting. Sutter tried to lock from the side and caught an elbow that made his mouth a blood story. Keller circled smarter than the other two, feigning left going high. Jonah didn't bite. He slid behind and took the choke the way he'd taught a generation of ghosts. Keller's eyes went saucer wide. Federal agents, a voice cutting in, clean, undeniable. Hands where we can see them. The parade security had unzipped their covers, and all that federal felt like a cold front. Badges out, warrants read. Sheriff Dole cuffed with hands that shook like a leaf on the wrong tree. Keller, Brandt, Sutter followed, faces carving the 5 stages of grief in real time. Phones up everywhere. The crowd found its voice, the woman whose boy's arm got broken, the business owner who got their loan pulled, the man who just said Lorraine's name like a prayer. Jonah stood straighter than his ribs allowed, a nick on his knuckle, blooming red eyes clear as winter. Naya brought him his cane. Walt leaned on his own. The band kids put their instruments down and watched men they'd been taught to salute get read their rights. 2 weeks later, the windows at Briggs Corner shined under new management sign, unnecessary because everyone already knew Nia ran the place with a grace you can't teach. Photos on the wall showed the whole town, not just the parts that fit a brochure. There was a small brass plate at Jonah's booth reserved for Mr. Briggs and a bigger plaque by the door. In honor of those who stood for truth, Jonah Briggs, Lorraine Pierce, Walter Garner. Truth fears no questions, it said, and you could hear Lorraine laugh at that. A man in a crisp suit with military posture came in, a quiet-handed, Jonah an envelope, and a thank you from people who still believed in oaths. Jonah didn't open it. He watched kids play outside, black, white, brown, sharing a jump rope like it had never been divided. You know what I see, he asked me. The future we promised. Not perfect, never that, but less afraid. Here's what I want to know from you, because stories like this don't end, they ripple. Where do you draw the line between respect the badge and respect the truth? Have you seen a town protect the wrong people? If you were there that morning at the diner, would you have looked away or stood up? Drop your city, your state, your stories in the comments. Let's talk about what justice really looks like where you live. And if this hit you in the gut, share it with someone who needs reminding that silence isn't peace. It's just the pause before somebody brave speaks.